My name is Peter Blackwood, and I am interviewing Blanche Warner for the oral history workshop that has been sponsored by the Wood Library in Canandaigua and the Ontario County Historical Society. Today is February 24th, 2022, and Blanche, I'd like to ask you just some general questions to begin with, such as when you were born and where you were born.
I was born September 25th, 1948 in Philadelphia at the Bryn Mawr Hospital. My parents had already moved to Naples, New York from Philadelphia because of my father's job, which was at the Morcatrell magazine subscription agency in North Cohocton, New York, a little town south of Naples. And he had gone there because he had previously been, after he got out of the Army, he'd been working at the Overbrook School for the Blind in their magazine.
Where was that?
That's in Philadelphia. My grandfather, Albert Cogill, was the principal of the Overbrook School for the Blind, and he gave my father a job.
As publisher?
As salesman for magazine subscriptions, because they were teaching the blind students how to sell magazines, which they apparently did very well. So in connection with that, I think they were affiliated with the Curtis Publishing Company, who published Saturday Evening Post and other magazines. There was a company called Morcatrell in North Cohocton, and as it turns out, in that little burg, they were the largest magazine subscription agency in the country. It turned into eventually EBSCO.
So they didn't actually create magazines, they just were like a third party managing subscriptions.
For instance, libraries, schools, instead of doing each subscription individually, they would have the company subscribe for them and just bill them one bill instead of having to do it separately.
Did they go back to Philadelphia to just have you, or?
Actually, yes, because my grandmother was worried that out here in the wilderness, you know.
Oh, really?
So my mother would go back to Philadelphia to have me and my brother, Bill, who's 4 years older. He was born in 1944. But at that time, my father was still in the Army Air Corps and living at that time, I think, in Florida.
Now, when did your parents get together? Approximately.
Let's make this legal. Let's see, 1943, possibly.
And your father was
William
a military member?
Right.
During World War II.
Just eventually turned into the Air Force.
Yes.
But he didn't go serve overseas. He taught gunnery, stuff like that. He wrote manuals. I think he went, maybe it was Yale, I think he went to a class for chemical warfare. He was in Washington, state of Washington for a while.
Was he an officer?
He was a captain.
Oh, okay. So he was college educated?
He was not.
Was not? Oh.
No.
But he must have really had some skills with literature and...
Apparently, yes.
To get to that level.
Right.
Interesting.
And my mother, as I said, was in Philadelphia. She was with him. I don't think she went to Washington with him. She might have just stayed with her parents in Philadelphia. My grandparents were Blanche and Albert Cogill, Cowgill.
This is on your mom's side?
On my mother's side. I don't know that I ever met my father's parents. But at any rate,
So you were born in 1948 in
Right.
Philadelphia, but they already lived in Naples,
correct.
right in the town?
Yeah, first we lived in 2 different apartments. And then we moved to the house, which is now Roots Restaurant in Naples.
Quite the house.
Right. And next to a vineyard. It's in a beautiful location. And I grew up there and stayed there until I left for Syracuse University for my freshman year in 1966. And I only stayed there a year. I wasn't really ready for college. And I didn't really finish my college education until I was in my 60s when I went to Empire State College. I had gone to CCFL to get an associate's degree. And then I went to Empire State College. You didn't go there. It
Right.
wasn't a bricks and mortar thing. It was, you had a mentor who was in charge of your program.
It was quote unquote online before online existed,
Right,
probably.
but I didn't do any online classes. I just had,
Yeah.
you had a professor, and you, between the professor and yourself, you came up with a contract, which was basically what are you going to read, what papers are you going to write.
So, just as a quick follow-up, when you went to SU for 1 year, you lived on campus?
Yes.
In a dorm?
Geneva Cottage. They were old Victorian houses on the way up to.
Up the hill?
Up the hill.
Sure.
You could see the Hall of Languages right there, and
Oh,
it was right
nice.
on that street.
And you didn't really enjoy that year, or?
Well, I probably enjoyed it too much was the problem.
Okay, totally understood.
Right.
And then you came back to Naples after
Yes,
that year?
yes, well, then I came back to Naples for a while, and then I went to Rochester. I was supposed to go to Monroe Community College, but once again, I just, didn't do it, so,
But when you came back to Naples, were you working then? Did you get a job?
yes,
You
got a
did.
job at the library
In Naples?
in Naples.
In
My mother was
1970?
the librarian, this was 1970.
Okay.
While I was in Rochester, I worked at Champion Products for a
Oh.
while, which was right across from where I was living, which was 228 North Goodman, near Cutler Union.
Yes.
Champion Products was right across the street.
And that was like, when you say you worked there, was that manufacturing? Or?
No, it was, I can't remember the name of the job description, but you handled orders and things like that, and packing stuff, on the phone with people.
Paperwork.
Yeah,
And...
paperwork.
So when did you start at the Naples Library again?
About 1970, 71. I just started part-time down in the basement,
As a-
unfolding old newspapers.
As a clerk,
Yeah,
more or less?
not formally.
Yeah.
But then about 1972, that's when I took the civil service test, and it was Tier 1 civil service
At the library?
at the library.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they had a system like that
Yeah.
back then.
They did, yes. And they still do. It's still a civil service job. But Tier 1 is if you're going to be on civil service, it was excellent to be.
Yes.
Good retirement is what I mean.
So you obviously, and then you continually worked at the library
Yes,
after that?
42 years.
For 42 years you
Yes.
worked at the Naples Library until you took it over, right?
Well, it took over me, yes. I was director from roughly, I would say 1995. Actually, you don't call it director unless you have an MLS, a Master of Library Science, which I
Mhm.
never did have.
Mm-hmm.
But you could say I was the manager.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a few things that I'm proud of a lot of things during those 42 years, but mainly I was proud of making it, first in 1996, we decided to, I have to go back even further and say that my mother was a librarian and I was working under her
In Naples?
in Naples.
Oh,
at the
okay, so
library.
she worked
Yes,
at the
yes,
Naples Library.
Yeah.
And what was her position
She
there?
was the manager. manager.
Okay, so she was the
So I was a
director,
clerk.
manager.
Right.
Excellent.
Nepotism.
I'm curious about the building.
I'm going to describe what happened.
Yeah.
Originally, it was just, it started in 1961 with a lot of books in the lobby of the bank across the street. A group of people decided that Naples needed a library. And so the banker, Bud Huber, and Tony and Helen Long, and a lot of other interested people, including Elizabeth Blodgett, who was the director of what became the Pioneer Library System. It's called OCLS. But anyway, Elizabeth helped my mother when she got the job, because my mother didn't know anything about being a librarian. She was an aide in the elementary school. First she was helping the art teacher, and then she was basically the librarian in the elementary school. They didn't even have a library there. She was in a broom closet with the books.
Wow. How long did your mom work at Naples Library?
Well, she was there for about 30 years or so, from 61 until she retired. And then I took over.
A real family history there in that library.
Yes. But I give credit to my mother. When my father died, she had been, working at the home, and she very suddenly had to get a job, and so that's when she started working at school, and then she started to work at the library after that.
Okay. So that was pretty early.
Yeah, she had gone to not college, but Philadelphia School of Industrial Arts, and she majored in costume design. She was going to work for Hattie Carnegie, designers and so forth, but then she got married, and that was that until they moved to Naples, and then when my father died, she got the job.
Okay.
But then, when she was librarian, a man named Gelser, Mr. Gelser, would come in during the summers. He was related to the Maxfield family, which was prominent in Naples. The Maxfields were bankers and had their hands in lots of different.
Sure.
The winery, Maxfield Winery, was there before Whitmer's. And that's on Route 36, County Road 36. It's now Lake Country Woodworkers.
Okay.
But that's where the Maxfield Winery was. George Gelser. And he used to come in and talk with Mom during the summers, because they had a cottage on Canandaigua Lake. And when he died, after he died, his wife came down. Greta Gelser was her name. And she was part of the Hopeman family in Rochester, who had shipping interests. So she came in one day with her, what I'll call her retinue, her driver, her housekeeper, and came in and sat down. She wanted to see the library where her husband has spent many happy hours.
Let me interrupt you 1 second. When you say came into the library, was that the current library?
No, that was the small library that we had then.
Okay,
This was
thank you.
1995, 96, something like that.
Okay.
It was a narrow 22 by, I think 80 feet long building.
It is small.
Yeah, next to Sutton's.
Okay.
It had been Myers Meat Market, and after that, I forget what else, but anyway, that was the original library in 1961. And then she came in for a visit to say, she appreciated the library because her husband had liked it so much, and she wanted to see what went on there, and it happened to be a very busy day. Fortunately, she sat down and stayed for a while along with her people and talked with my mother and me. And she said, "This is very busy." I said, "Yes, we'd like to expand, and the building next door is for sale. But we don't have the money," and we told her about our finances and so forth.
How many people worked there then?
My mother, myself, and there would be Pages, high school.
Okay.
who worked there.
So you guys basically were the
We're
library.
it, yes. And so she went away that day, thank you very much.
Hmm.
And
With
the
her
next-
entourage.
Yes, with her entourage, get in the big car. And the next day she called and said, you told me about that building's for sale? I said, yes. And she said, oh, well, I think we can help you with that. And meanwhile, I am amazed and can't believe what I'm hearing. And they did help with that, and that started the fundraising. They insisted that we involve the municipalities, go out and, you know, we identify who has the funds to help us with this, and we hired somebody to help us with that, and we paid her as long as, you know, how to fundraise was basically what we needed to know, and we hired her for as long as we thought we could afford it, and then went on our own with the fundraising, and that was a learning experience that I hope to go through only once in my life.
Was there funding from municipalities?
There was.
Including the county, say, or the village?
There was the town, the village, and so we made a list of people that we thought might be interested in helping us give house parties for
Okay.
people who might be
Yeah.
large donors, and we had 3 of those, very successful, and we had a fundraising campaign from the community, also successful, and in the middle of this fundraising, Mrs. Gelser called and said, we'll match it 1 for 1, and then she called again and said, we'll match it 2 for 1 if they give this amount, we'll match it 3 for 1 if they go this amount. They obviously knew how to run a campaign and how to give. And not only did they do that, but they gave $300,000 as an endowment, and they gave $20,000 a year for 15 years because they knew that it was going to cost more money for basically doubling the size of the building because we'd need more help, insurance, all the rest of it. So
How long do you think that whole process took before you were able to settle into the new?
well, first of all, we had to get out of the building because of all the work going on, knocking out the wall between the 2 places.
So you expanded into that space?
Yes.
Okay.
And there was a wall, a common wall.
Mhm.
So we just knocked out the wall between, made a firewall to what's now the Caruso's restaurant. And that took, I don't know, 6 months.
Sure.
And for that 6 months, we packed up all the books and moved part of them down to what's now the little red schoolhouse. It's called Old School
Okay.
Restaurant now. And that was the library for 6 months.
Wow.
And we moved everything back, had a big opening.
I bet.
Yeah, that was great. And all in all, it raised from the Gelsers $1.2 million.
Wow.
I used to go to the Clifton Springs Library, which was an old railroad station.
Yes, I've been in it.
Wood and brass and so forth, and they had a big donor. And in the old days, when we used to have library meetings at different libraries during the year, I would go there and think, boy, I wish I had a sugar daddy someday. And we had a sugar mommy.
Yes, you
And
did.
After we were through with the process, Mrs. Gelser and her 2 children decided they had such a good time doing that they gave about the same amount to the Strong Museum
Wow.
for books there.
Sure. Quite a philanthropist.
Yes, very grateful to them.
Just a quick side note, quick answer. Is Naples Library now community-based funding, or is it?
Yes,
It
that's
is.
the second thing I'm proud of.
Oh,
is,
oh, I'm sorry to make it quick then.
No.
I'm aware of the process.
Thank you for doing my segue for me. In 2007, it became clear that going to the town and the village and the town of South Bristol was not going to be sufficient for the size library we had become. So we decided to become a school district. Also, the Pioneer Library System would like it if everybody became a school district public library. Because it involves getting the citizens of the school district to vote to tax themselves. And it's a school district because libraries are not allowed to raise tax money themselves. Right. So schools do it for them. And it doesn't mean that they have any say as to what happens at the library. It's just called the school district public library because they collect the tax funds. So there has to be a vote. And that's a whole process of going to the public and informing them of what a school district public library is. It's very confusing when they see a line item on their vote saying library district. They think, why is this the school library? Why is that separate from the rest? And it's not, and so it all has to be explained. So you have to do a lot of publicity, have public meetings, telling the public why it's needed, and to please vote. There's a public vote at the school, and that happens whenever you want to raise the amount that you want to have contributed.
Is it voted on annually now?
It is if you ask it to be.
Okay, for an increase.
For an increase.
I see. Okay.
But the basic amount stays the same until you increase it.
Right.
So the basic amount stays the same whether the vote passes or not.
So you oversaw that whole process?
Well, I and the board and
right.
Other people, yes.
Which is a huge accomplishment.
Well, they voted 2-1 to approve it. Yeah, so that was nervous-making, to say the least. But when we became a school district library, there was a complication, which is that the population, my education, the education of whoever is in my job, my former job, is if it's over 5,000 people, you have to have a bachelor's degree. And if it's over 7,500, you have to have a master's, I think. I might be wrong, but I know I had to finish I only had an associate's degree, so I had to, I had mixed feelings about the,
sure.
the vote. All of a sudden, yay, we've got money, but now I have to.
And when was that?
That was 2007.
So you had to
go back to school.
Back to college.
Yes, and finish my degree. So I finally finished it, in my 60s.
And where was this?
Taking 1 or 2 courses at a time. When was it?
Where?
Oh, where? It was Empire.
Empire. So you were able to do it remotely?
Yeah, remotely, and not go to classes, just read and write.
And you got your bachelor's then in?
Art history.
Oh, nice. Art history.
I wasn't going to stay long after, I was going to retire in a few years. So I finally decided just to take art history because that's what I wanted to take.
And because of the population, the bachelor's was enough?
Enough, yeah.
And what year did you retire?
2017.
17. So 5 years ago now.
Right. Yep.
And since you retired...
Yes, I've been keeping busy.
You've been doing a lot of volunteer work?
I've been volunteering in the Naples Historical Society. Every Thursday, which is today, after I get through here, I'll be going into the archives and working with a few other volunteers, getting the archives in order and accessing things. And I post every Thursday on Facebook, and we do Instagram. That's fun.
Sure.
Putting the posts on about Naples history.
Is that Historical Society, is that a place?
It's at the, people might know the Morgan Hose building. We have actually, the society owns 4 buildings, which is the Morgan Hose building. There's a little shop next to it, we call it the Tin Shop. Then there's the red mill that Bill Beerheil gave to the Historical Society. It's across the street from the Morgan Hose building, which is loaded with things, but we can't, it's not safe for people to go in right now. But we will someday. This is a small society, and we have another building called the Cleveland House, which is a museum which we're hoping to open this summer.
Oh, nice.
For weekends maybe.
Was it open before?
For a week or two in the summer before COVID, and then we
Okay.
shut it down. That is a house that was built, it was one of the two oldest houses in town from Cleveland in 1794, 95.
You would,
Go ahead.
you would probably be considered an expert on Naples history.
I'm not an expert by any means, but I know, I wish every week that Bill Beerheil were still here to answer a lot of questions, but slowly, we have a town historian, John Murphy, and then the owner of the Maxfield Inn, Wayne Bouchard, knows an awful lot about Naples history.
And I would also guess that when you say you do that on Thursday, I would also guess it involves other days of the week too.
Definitely, yes,
For
yes.
sure.
There's a lot of research going on before I
Yes.
do whatever it is, and then I have to consider what people are going to ask when I post something, so that I know the answer before they ask it. So, but it's always something that comes up that I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fun, finding out.
Let me take you back a little ways.
Yes,
So you've seen Naples for a lot of years.
yes.
You are Naples almost. And what are the biggest changes you've seen in Naples in 50 years, let's say?
Well, yikes, that's a good question.
Let me say this, when I drive through Naples, I've never lived there. I look at Naples and I think, boy, this place hasn't changed in 50 years, but I know it has.
Yeah.
It's just ways I don't
Yeah.
know.
It seems to me that, well, the roads are wider, some of the old buildings are decrepit,
Mm-hmm.
but it's always been that way. Some of the old buildings are gone, like one of the apartments we used to have is where the post office now is, next to the Memorial Town Hall. It seems like there are more artists, musicians. It's gone that way. The Naples Mill School was there in the 70s.
So you've seen a growth in the arts.
I think so, but it's always been an arty kind of town. It's a beautiful place. I mean, it's the southern end of Canandaigua Lake. There are all kinds of people in the town. That's what makes it's diverse that way. I would say it's not diverse generally as far as non-white people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the least diverse places in the country, probably.
I would guess it's typical of a lot of the southern tier of
Correct.
New York.
Right. But I think, as opposed to a lot of small towns that I see in this area, it has a discrete village with beautiful homes. People love to come here because it's quaint.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to, it has a septic system finally, and that will make a difference, I think, as far as what industry comes into town, what kinds of businesses. I was on the zoning board of appeals in the, I can't remember, maybe 80s. And you try to keep the small town flavor as well as keeping the tax base
Mm-hmm.
up so that we can remain a thriving community.
Seems like there's a lot of attention now, and I might be wrong, but paid to tourism.
Yes, that's the main industry probably. The school is the other one. Used to be Whitmer's, Hazlitt's is there now, that's a big change.
Yes.
The school expanded, but at the same time, the population of the school is, I don't know, it's in the 400s, I think. Which, when I was there, is maybe 900.
Oh, wow. So that's a big change.
A big change.
So the number of
Students.
students.
Correct. And when I went there, it was all in one building. By the time I graduated, there was an elementary school.
The building right on Main Street.
Yeah, it's a beautiful building. That was a WPA project in
Wow, okay.
1939, I think. So I've been learning about the educational system and where all the district schools, the schools became centralized in the 30s, and where all the schoolhouses are. The schoolhouse, old school restaurant was a one-room schoolhouse.
Mm.
That's next to the cemetery, next to Bob and Ruth's.
Mhm.
But yeah, the school system has changed quite a bit. So when I was there, it was all in one building.
How do you
And there were
account?
fewer administration, but more students.
Mhm. How do you account for the drop in the student population?
That's not my
Yeah.
area of expertise, I don't know.
And I'm gonna take you
Fewer
back,
children.
way back. What do you remember when you're, say, I'll just say 10 years old, of doing that was fun in Naples?
Wow. You know, I'm gonna sound old now. In those days, we had a lot more freedom, I think, as children. I'm gonna go younger than 10.
Understood, sure.
There were not many people in my neighborhood. There was Joe Adams, across the street and down to the north all the ways, and he was my main friend growing up.
Mhm.
I was at his house more than I was at my own house. As a tangent on that, I'll tell you a little bit about Joe Adams' family. His family was from Germany, and his father worked at Widmer's. His mother was a seamstress, and they went. Her father was ill. This was just before World War II, and they decided to go back and see her father, and they got caught in Germany, couldn't come back. And Joe's sister, Marlice Adams, who was, I think, a senior in high school when we were just starting, was a child in Germany with her brothers at the time. They went to school. She wrote a book called Queen of the Bremen about their time in Germany during World War II. And she's lectured at Wood Library a couple of times, all over the place with her husband, who just recently died, and her last name is Marlice Adams. I don't know if you heard her speak, but she's a powerful speaker about those times. I won't go into what her story is, but I suggest you read Queen of the Bremen.
Queen of the
Bremen, which is
Bremen.
a ship, Bremen, and they have a copy in Naples and at
Mhm.
Wood Library.
Mhm.
Excellent book. But anyway, when I was 10, I don't remember it, but younger, I was asthmatic. That was a big part of my childhood.
And that would have been a lot worse then than now.
Yes,
Far
no
fewer
inhalers.
treatments. No.
You went to the hospital. But I don't remember going to the hospital, maybe once. But I remember walking with my mother. My father took the car, 4 miles to North Cohocton to work during an episode, and trying to breathe and walking up the mile to the doctor's office. And then I would have to go to Rochester to get shots at Dr. Glazer's on Goodman Street. I remember that well. I was on a milk-free diet for 3 years because of allergies. And soy milk in those days was not very pleasant. It tasted like the barnyard or something. It was
Mm-hmm.
pretty awful. So for 3 years I was my mother, poor thing, was having to make a separate meal for me.
Mm-hmm.
No butter, soy butter, soy milk.
Did you used to walk downtown much?
We walked to school.
Walk to school?
Yeah. So we were, 4/10 of a mile from the school.
Yeah.
But the bus stopped, so we probably took the bus or walked. Yeah. But I generally had good school years.
You had behind your house that huge field the whole area,
It was all vineyard, all vineyard.
that was all vineyard all
Yeah.
the way through.
Right.
Did you play in that area?
Yes. I remember learning how to shoot a .22, I think, my brother and I.
Okay.
Put juice cans on top of the, on top of the posts, the grape posts.
Sure.
And standing in our backyard and shooting the juice cans off the post. And sure, we had grapes. We didn't.
Yeah. Were you supposed to be playing in the vineyard? That was okay?
Probably not.
Okay.
This
Was
is
that
what I-
Widmer's then?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
Whitmer's. I think we had a right-of-way where they turned around between the rows of
Mhm.
connecting properties. So they said, yes, you could pick the grapes, but we just, had a grape every once in a while. We didn't make wine or anything out of it. There was a house in the middle of that vineyard that used to be. It was burned down maybe 20 years ago.
Huh.
But I remember somebody lived there who was what they used to call a DP, or a displaced person after World War II.
Okay.
Lived there. Just an aside,
Haven't heard that term before.
yeah, DP. Also, there was a POW camp next to Widmer's. I don't know if you've heard about that.
A little bit.
There were Italian prisoners and mostly German prisoners. I think maybe a couple of hundred of them. There's one barracks left that's on Toby Street, next to Widmer's still. But they helped with the harvest, the grape, the vineyards. They worked in the vineyards. And I think they probably had a better time of it than our prisoners in Germany at the Stalags.
Sounds like if they're picking grapes, that's probably is a little better than.
And a lot of people in the village and up on Rhine Street spoke German. There were a lot of Swiss, Austrian, German immigrants who came to do, the grapes. The Widmers were from,
After the war.
yeah, in the after the Civil War. They
Oh,
came
okay.
in the
Oh, way back. Okay.
1880s. Widmer started in 1888, but they came before that.
The town, the village is kind of surrounded by hills
Yes.
of a mostly vacant land. Did you spend much time in your whole childhood up in the hills, like the southern part of High Tor?
No,
No.
not at all.
Okay.
But we spent it down by the creek and
Sure.
wandering around. I mean, in those days, you went out by yourself, and they said, "See you, when I call
Supper
you."
time.
Yeah, when it gets dark.
I think, did your mom have a special call that you knew?
No.
Mine did.
What was it?
Oh, I couldn't do it. But both my brother and my sister and I knew that was my mom calling.
Yeah. Well, there was a porch light that they would,
Oh.
turn the light on and off.
Oh, there you go.
My mother got the doctor that way once. She called the doctor's office, I think I was sick or something, and called the office. The nurse said, he's just left, but if you go out on your porch and turn your light on and off, you might see it. So he did, came in. But that's changed too. Doctors don't make house calls now either.
Mhm.
But I can't remember, house by house, what's changed. Even if I
Sure.
went on a tour with you, I could say, there's where I did this and there's where I did that. But with Joe was very healthy, and I had to keep up with him, so I think he helped actually with my asthma. I outgrew it.
Was he your age?
Yeah, we were
Okay.
in class together. So I think having to keep up with him helped me.
Did you like the high school experience there?
Yes,
Yeah?
I wasn't a part of any clique per se. I went from group to group.
And what year did you graduate?
66.
66, you already said that, yeah.
My best friends came when we were juniors. They came from other places.
Do you remember the British invasion musically?
I do. I remember watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I couldn't, and the screaming was so loud that I thought, you can't even hear the music.
Yeah, so you would have been in high school then.
I was, let's see, what year was that, 64? 60,
Yeah.
or is that when they broke up and it was,
No, 64.
okay, so
Ed
I
Sullivan.
would have been maybe a sophomore. Yeah, I remember it vividly.
I'm sure you do. I just remember kids in the class talking about it
Yeah.
the first week or two. And
I never got the screaming kind of stuff. I guess I wasn't the screaming type. And the same thing happened when that mass hysteria kind of thing when Kennedy was shot. I remembered I was a sophomore and I was in English class and girls were running down the hallway screaming, and I thought,
Wow.
yeah, that kind of mass, not hysteria, but
Sure.
you know what I mean, emotion. But I remember that. I remember the class, you know, Bob Veerhal, Bill's brother, I took English from him. And then school being dismissed, and then the next week or so, it was on TV the whole time, of course. So that's vivid in my memory.
Sounds like it. Well, you're at an age there too where it
Right, exactly.
I just remember snippets of it from third grade.
Right, right,
But yeah, it would have been very different in high school. Same thing with the Beatles.
right. I always remember that I liked the Rolling Stones better than the Beatles. That's just me. What else? I remember my teachers. I had Latin. People don't take Latin much anymore. I had 3 years of Latin
In high school.
in high school.
Wow.
Yeah. Which
No
I-
wonder you had a good freshman year at SU then.
I didn't have to call on my Latin much there. I had French there. I took French in Syracuse. I thought for a while I'd be a language major because it came fairly easily to me. Unlike math, for instance. I liked algebra, but not geometry.
You got your degree, your college, bachelor's in art history. Have you done art yourself?
I don't do studio, I'm not an artist, no,
You
my
haven't-
mother was.
You haven't created art
No,
yourself?
I'm not a creator, I'm an appreciator.
Well, except for the library.
Well, yes.
Quite the creator there, it sounds like.
Right. Oh, I forgot to say, I was Librarian of the Year in 2014, right before I,
For PLS?
Pioneer Library System, yeah.
Wow.
And my speech was, I guess there's something to be said for longevity. I kept it short.
Oh, congratulations on that.
I was happy to receive that.
Sure. At their annual
Dinner
get
in October,
together. Yeah.
And I still keep up with some of the librarians, and there's a picnic in the summer. I don't know if it's every year, but I hope to do that again. But I know Mary Ferris has been here almost as long as I was, or maybe even longer than I was
She's-
in Naples.
She's in her 40-something year.
Yeah.
I don't know what.
And we were both redheads. Now we're blondes.
The redhead librarians.
Right. Well, there was another one here. Wasn't Pat Moss a redhead? I don't know. There were 3 Pats working at Wood. But anyway, that's
So now
my experience with library.
most of your time now is interested or focused on the historical.
Right. And I do work in the archives at the library too.
Oh, okay.
That was off while COVID was going on. But
And that's for the library?
yeah.
Okay. What does that entail?
It's the same thing as the Historical Society. It's cataloging materials, and generally what I do is go through the stuff and see what I can post about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that keeps people interested in what's in the history of Naples and appreciate it,
So you have been in Naples your entire life,
except for Syracuse and Rochester, yes.
and the day you were born in Philadelphia.
Correct. Yes. I remember going to my grandparents in Philadelphia for Christmas and so forth, but that was before you could communicate with people on your phone, and
Right.
so we weren't that close with our grandparents. And I only knew that my mother's parents, not the father's parents.
You had one sibling?
Bill, my brother,
Your
is
brother.
4 years older. He and his family live in near Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh,
He was
okay.
with IBM for 26, 27 years. He was the vice president when he left. He said there were like 26 vice presidents. He's had an interesting life too. He was in the Army as well. He was in Vietnam. He was lieutenant. But yeah, we were estranged for maybe 20 years after my mother died. But we got together a couple of years ago, and we've become good friends. His wife is Gloria. He has 3 children and
That's lovely.
grandchildren.
Especially after 20 years of
Yeah.
not knowing somebody.
Right. I recommend it.
I'll tell my brother.
I won't ask. All right.
Well, Blanche, that's a wonderful history.
Well, thank you.
You are Naples,
Thank you very much.
and sounds like the village owes a lot to you.
Well, I owe a lot to the village too. I'm happy to be there.
Well, what's nice is it's a back and forth type thing.
Right,
It's,
right.
but think of all the stuff that you've done for that town. Libraries are a huge deal, you know, I feel strongly
They
about
are.
that, and
I do too.
you're the epitome of that, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the history.
My pleasure.
We'll
And
close on that.
Thank you. It's just a good project. I'm glad to be
Yes.
part of it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.